Hey, welcome back out to the channel. My name's Kim. I'm a licensed and nationally certified East Asian medical provider and a Taoist practitioner. We've been talking about turbo cancers, and so the question has been, is there some science that suggests that maybe we should look into this further? What's happened? What has led us to some scientists saying that we need to look into turbo cancers and their possible relationship with the mRNA vaccines? And we've been kind of walking through the history and things that happen. And so today we're going to continue on with that storytelling. And do you remember when you were a kid and you used to go out camping and everybody would sit around the campfire and you tell scary stories? Well, I feel like it's my turn right now, and here's a scary story that I'm going to share with you. So anyways, so grab your blanket, marshmallows, chocolate, graham crackers, and let's get started. In the last episode, we ended in the beginning, January of 2022. That was when the courts ordered Pfizer and the FDA to immediately release all their documents, and they did, and that happened on February 1st. At that time, it was like there was this pressure, this back pressure of research, of scientists who wanted to come out and who wanted to be heard. And as soon as those documents hit the streets and suddenly they exposed that maybe a lot of the stuff that we were being sold, maybe that wasn't completely accurate, all the science starts blowing up. There was one research study that was released in 2022, but in February. But in order to understand that, let's go to April of 2022 when the Muddy Waters report was released. And that was the Senate report on what are the origins of COVID? What do we know about it? What is out there? What do we know today? And so I'm going to flip us over. I'm so happy that I have my computer here and I'm able to pull this information up. We're going to look at this Muddy Waters report. It's the Origins of COVID-19 report. This happened so long ago, you probably forgot about it. This was the Senate report. There was this big committee who went through, combed all the information, and put this together so that senators could understand that, which meant that they're going to write it in language that you and I can understand. And this was probably the first report that really helped me understand what the problem is. And what it was that we were looking at is a spike protein. Do you notice, ever since COVID started, nobody talks about the virus that the spike protein is attached to. In fact, science doesn't care what virus is attached to that spike protein because the spike protein has so many unique characteristics that it's the spike protein that they're worried about. The Muddy Waters reports did a great job of explaining this spike protein to us. And what we learned from the Muddy Waters report is that there's two pieces of this spike protein. There's subunit 1 and subunit 2. And subunit 1 gets a lot of attention because there is a lot of unique things going on in it. Subunit 2, after subunit 1 attaches to some cell in our body, Subunit 2 is the one that injects the virus in there. But a lot of focus is on all the unique things that are happening in subunit 1. So let's just look at some of that information, because some of that information may have some relevance to why these turbo cancers are taking off. Okay, so what did the Muddy Waters report teach us about this spike protein, which is going to be the scary monster in my story? And it taught us, it taught us about 5 different things with the spike protein, but there's 3 things that I'm going to talk about that might have some sort of relationship to cancers in the body. So one of the first things that they learned about the spike protein is that in subunit 1, there's this sequence that allows it to change, that allows it to mutate easily. So that's part of this constantly mutating COVID thing that we're seeing, because in a regular flu, what happens for that to mutate? It usually takes 5 years, 5 to 10 years for the flu to mutate. This thing's mutating in months. So there's this piece of the spike protein that encourages it to change when pressured by external influence. There's another part of this that you hear about all the time. It's called this furin cleavage site, and cleavage, where you break it. So it's this furin cleavage that breaks subunit 1 and subunit 2 into 2 separate pieces. That is, for some strange reason, is in the absolute perfect place, the only place that this furin cleavage site could be between these 2 subunit 1s and subunit 2s, the only place it could be in order to make this spike protein the most infectious it could be. Any place else in that spike protein, it would be less infectious. That was the other thing that caught everybody's attention, because nature doesn't believe in perfection. Nature believes in diversity. And so to be perfect, that's something that usually humans strive for. Nature, not so much. But that was one of the things. Now, here was the other thing that I found interesting about why would you want to use a furin cleavage site. And oh my gosh, this is going to take us back to that one report that was released in February of 2022. Let me tell you why you would use a furin cleavage site. One of the things that you would want to do with this is by cutting this protein up into 2 pieces when it's in the body. By doing that, you allow it to retain its functionality so it can keep on going, like the little Energizer bunny. Functionality of subunit 1 is to attach to the cell and to start changing how that cell's reacting. The functionality of subunit 2 is to inject a virus into the cell. And another thing that you could do is when you cut it and it splits the proteins apart, it exposes both the proteins, and that could activate another subsequence that you have in this protein that you've created. Using a cleavage site is to enhance the features of whatever protein it is that you've created in the body. One of the things that they found in the Muddy Waters report is that they had this strange furin cleavage site that is not found in this subcategory of viruses. It's found in other family types, but not in this one. And it would be difficult for that to happen. Not completely impossible, but difficult for a furin cleavage site to actually show up in a family that doesn't have it. And so that was one of the things that, got scientists going, that's weird. And then we look at why you would use a furin cleavage site. Okay. So right next to this furin cleavage site is another sequence of proteins. And they don't know exactly what these sequence of proteins are, but these sequence of proteins are in subunit 1. So furin cleavage site, where you cut the protein, and then there's a sequence. From their research, what they found is with that sequence in there, it made the coronavirus more infective. So it actually increased its ability to infect us and increased its ability to go into our lungs. Let's go back to that study or that research report that was released in February 2022. So that was released a few months before this Muddy Waters report. And I just want to touch base on that. And then I'm going to come back to one more thing on this Muddy Waters report. But what they released was it was a series of scientists, a perspective that was talking about the SARS-CoV-2 furin cleavage site and the potential recombination link. And so I'm going to put a link below to this research study, and then also to the patent that they're talking to in this research study. But one of the things they said is that, that unique sequence appears to be a patent that was filed in 2016. And so I went out to that patent because I was kind of curious what it was. And the patent is interesting because it's a patent to modify polynucleotides. So it's going to modify our DNA or our RNA or our messenger RNA to deliver a series of instructions to our cells. And that series of instructions is going to tell the cell to make this protein. Isn't that interesting? Because isn't that what this whole vaccine is supposed to do? It's supposed to use messenger RNA, polynucleotides. So polynucleotides in the body are going to be DNA, they are going to be RNA, and they are going to be messenger RNA. They're not going to be like proteins. And so this is a sequence that allows you to modify a polynucleotide in order to tell the body to create a certain protein, a certain peptide. And what's interesting about this is this research was for cancer. And they were trying to create a sequence that would tell the body to make a specific protein that they thought would be cancer related. So that's what was really interesting about that whole sequence. And, when I was reading through the research, they actually talked about the furin cleavage site and that you might want to use it for these issues. And so I think the whole patent was really interesting because not only did they talk about the furin cleavage site, they talked about some other technology that we found out about a lot later, like growing this stuff in E. coli or yeast or funguses because if you did it that way instead of a sterile environment like the emergency use authorization was for these vaccines, if instead of growing that messenger RNA in a sterile environment, if you could do it instead in E. coli or yeast or something like that, it had a high turnover rate. It created a lot. And that was one of the reasons why they liked using those things like certain bacteria and certain funguses. So it was a really interesting patent, but I thought I'd bring that up because there's this incredible link to cancer research. But there's one more thing that the Muddy Waters report was talking about, and that was the integrin receptor. So integrin receptors do a couple things in our body, and they connect to cells. They get cells to they say adhere to each other. And so that's a little bit different than connecting. These are like they're sticking to each other. And then they also deal with cell signaling, telling our cells to do things or cell survival. When they're abnormal, when they don't work like they're supposed to, they are prominent in tumors and in cancers. And that must be because of its abnormal adhesion and its cell signaling to increase the production of whatever is abnormal. So those were the three things in the Muddy Waters report. And at that time, there was this wall of science, of researchers, of people who had been studying this that wanted to come forward And there's this period of time from the time that Pfizer and the FDA released their documents to, the middle of that year, where all this incredible science is coming out about this spike protein and about its potential in our body. So we're in this weird period between April to July. And at this time, we know that net neutrality was ripped apart in 2017. So that means that you can censor. You can censor anything you want. And because in net neutrality, the only way you could censor somebody was with a court order. But now that we don't have net neutrality, anything could be censored. Whatever anybody wants to censor, they could censor. And we also had the thing of, in net neutrality, you couldn't determine what I was going to see or what you were going to see. Everybody was supposed to have equal access to deliver their content to the end user. But without net neutrality, you could limit what an individual was going to see, what I was going to see. You could target individuals and show them what you wanted them to see. You could advertise. Really annoying. So net neutrality doesn't exist right now. With the new FCC person, they are trying to put net neutrality back in place. We probably need that, right? We know now. We got a big learning here. We probably need that. Well, so it's not there. And suddenly, as more and more scientists come out, and they're not saying anything good about these treatments and or medical procedures, they're not saying a good thing about them. And suddenly, censorship starts stepping up on social media. Everything starts getting pulled down. By July, everybody's material is getting pulled down. If they're saying anything that has the word mRNA, vaccine, shots, any of that, that material is getting pulled down, and they're getting strikes on their channel, myself included. They're getting banned off of channels, and you can see that the mainstream social media is starting to hear about this, because the people who are creating the content providers are starting to talk about, hey, this is getting censored. They're starting to pull their stuff off. They're starting to go to platforms that used to be considered radical, like Rumble, and posting it there, or setting up their own website and posting their content there. And they're coming off of these mainstream social media sites. In fact, you see a lot of individuals have done that, myself included, which is one of the key reasons why I had set up Health Hub, because some of the science was pointing to some really specific things that we could do to improve our health. And yet, if you brought that up on some of the mainstream social media, your content would get pulled. So it's getting out of control, and the mainstream viewers are starting to voice their concerns. And it's starting, I imagine for YouTube and Facebook, it was probably kind of a really uncomfortable period of time, because they had the government on one side, and then they had their end users on the other side, and both of them were pushing pretty hard. And then July happens, and there's the lawsuit in Missouri. And that's that censorship lawsuit against the government, and that they were using back doors on these social media platforms and telling them to pull content down. Just randomly, all this content, they were having them pull down. And that, it was almost like somebody took a pin out of a balloon and the air comes out, and the censorship takes a sudden halt. And even though the censorship takes a sudden halt, everybody's waiting and holding their breath and trying to figure out where to go from here. And it takes about another month. So from July to August, it takes about another month for the government to get an injunction that allows them to still communicate with some of the social media platforms. But at that time, we hear the retirement of Anthony Fauci, and the intensity of the suppression of information almost just releases. And we're in another kind of weird zone right now. I'm not saying that Mr. Fauci was one of the key impetuouses for the censorship. I'm just saying that it's coincidental that he announces his retirement in July or in August, right after the court verdict in July, and that the amount of censorship has taken a step back since December of 2022. So I don't know, maybe he had something to do with it. Maybe he didn't. I'm just saying that this is what happened, and this is how it looked to the end users, and how it looked to me too, because suddenly all my content wasn't getting censored. Woo! So, okay, wow, good for me. And but it didn't change the fact that I still stayed cautious in some of the really key information on some of the things that could help with our health and could help us change what we're doing to improve our health. That stayed in Health Hub, because there wasn't any point of me even trying to put it out here. So now we're in August, and we know that Mr. Fauci is going to retire in December of 2022. And then we also are going to start seeing more appeals to this Missouri ruling. And in 2023, the Supreme Court will agree to hear this appeal on this censorship case, but it won't hear it until 2024. So that's where we're at right now. I'm going to stop here, because then what we're going to do is, in the next episode, we might as well talk about some of the things that start happening in 2023, because now, without this break on sharing of information and sharing of science, a lot of information started coming out, and just information that for me was shocking. Well, since the Pfizer documents were shocking to me, pretty much any science that they're bringing out is going to be shocking to me. But we'll look at that, and we'll see some of the things that could be suppressing the immune system, that suppression could lead to cancer. Some of the other things that might suggest that some of the changes in our immune system may be impacted by this, and that might lead to cancer, and maybe we should study this more. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. There's no way that they could have done all the testing that they needed to do to be completely sure about this completely new technology. I think people did the best that they could within the time frames given. But now, let's step back, and let's not have this be another PFAS thing, or let's not have this be another Aaron Brockovich thing. Let's really kind of look at this stuff in advance and try to figure out, is there something that we should do differently and to protect public health? I don't know. Okay, so that's this episode. Come back for Claire Donovan, because, she's always fun to talk to. And then in the next episode, we're going to go into some of the science that's happened in 2023 and what we learned even more. Okay, so until next time, I'll catch you on the other side.